Hey y'all, Frank Markow here. I'll be your instructor for this class, The Leadership Revolution. This is a new class that I've designed especially for our Oxford experience. And I've done a lot of teaching in the area of organizational theory, behavior, and leadership, but I'm doing something different this class. We're taking a look at the 20th century, and we're going to look at some of the key people, movements, and ideas that made that century so impactful, and what are the lessons that we can learn about leadership from them. Sometimes we think about revolutions in terms of political revolutions, and the 20th century certainly had its share of those, but we're not going to be looking at those kinds of revolutions. We're going to be looking at, for example, the cultural revolutions, the technological revolutions, the way organizations have transformed. We're going to be looking at a lot of the religious revolutions and how the whole religious landscape and the church landscape changed from those early days at Azusa Street to the advent of the mega church in the 80s and 90s. We'll be looking at a lot of the great figures from people like William Seymour, Aimee Semple McPherson, Billy Graham, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Winston Churchill, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the list goes on and on and on. There were so many influential people, and not only people, but the movements that they began. When we think of people like Aimee Semple and Seymour, we think about the Foursquare Gospel and Church of God in Christ. We'll look at Billy Graham, but also the institutions that followed him, like the National Association of Evangelicals. We'll also look at some of the reformations that happened outside of the Protestant church, like Vatican II, and what does that mean for the Protestants? We'll also look at some of the ideas that shaped the 20th century. Taylor's whole revolution of how organizations should run, and this idea that organizations could be scientifically managed in order for maximum efficiency. Well, you might say, well, that sounds like a factory, Dr. Markow. Yeah, but there's a lot of residue of Taylorism even in the modern church today. We'll also look at how these ideals of some of the modern entrepreneurs, the startups and the tech bros, where did those guys get started? Who were some of their influences, and how did this whole modern world that we live in get started back in the 70s and 80s and 90s? You know, we all take it for granted that we have these cell phones, that we can communicate, we use Zoom, but the technological and cultural seeds that made this possible were planted firmly in the 20th century. We're going to learn all about that. Now, you might be saying, Dr. Markow, that's a lot to cover. We're covering church history, we're covering sociology, we're covering leadership theory. Yes, we are covering those, but I have a framework to help you understand all those things, all right? It's my job to make the complex simple. That's what I do. And so here is the 5-arc framework that we're going to use to understand all of these things. And this isn't just for one period or the other, but all of these various revolutions can be looked at by one of these frames or multiple of these frames. For example, from movement to institution. All right, so what does that mean? That means that something starts off organically, naturally. Maybe it was a God-birthed movement like the Pentecostal movement at Azusa Street. But eventually these movements become institutions. They become organized. They become sustained. This is a natural progression. And so we'll see this idea happen over and over again in the 20th century. Well, another revolution is from church to culture. How did the church impact the culture? And at what point did the church, for better or worse, start to reflect the culture? There's a good one for you. We'll also look at the revolution of from local to scale. A lot of movements and organizations start off very small, right? But then they begin to grow and to blossom. And I think nothing epitomizes this better than the advent of the modern megachurch, right? They started off small, but because of the giftedness and the charisma and vision of the leaders, they are now huge, some worldwide movements. We'll also look at the revolution of from steam to silicon. Technology boomed in the 20th century. It's hard to imagine, the beginning of the 20th century, there was no such thing as radio, TV, internet, airplanes. But within 100 years, all of those things came online, and they radically transformed the way we think, the way we act, the way we lead, the way churches operate today. So we're going to use that as a framework to help us understand the revolutionary arc in the 20th century. And then finally, we'll look at from command to collaboration. So early on in the 20th century, I mentioned Taylorism, this idea that the leader was larger and in charge. By the end of the 20th century, different approaches and thinking about what made leadership effective came around. This idea of collaboration and teamwork and team development and empowerment, right? So how do we transition from this idea of command to collaboration? That's another one of the important revolutions that happened in the 20th century. So I just want to say welcome to the class. We'll be getting into a lot more details. Hopefully this piqued your interest somewhat. But this class really, it's not a history class. It's not a leadership class. It's not a sociology class. It's all of those things. And my goal is to bring them all together so that we can learn from some of the fascinating people, ideas, and movements of the 20th century so you can be a better leader in the 21st century. And I'm so looking forward as well to our time together in Oxford when we can talk about these things. Now, before the class, we're going to do a lot of reading and researching and working together online so that when we show up in Oxford, we're going to have great conversations around all these things, and a lot of the fog that you're probably experiencing right now will be gone by then, and you will be contributors to this class. You're all going to do presentations and group work. We've got some great guest presenters as well, and it's going to be a beautiful setting, and we're going to do some exploring around the country as well. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Of course, my information, go on the website, the right space, and you can see my contact information. But if you have any questions, any problems, let me know. Not any problems, class-related issues. I am here for you. Looking forward to working with you in this class. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.